This meeting is being recorded.
Good afternoon and welcome to the first segment of the Dawn Lafferty Hochsprung Spring 2022 webinar series. My name is Dr. Jerry Steele, Assistant Professor and Chair of the Doctoral Program in Educational Leadership at Russell Sage College. This webinar series is offered under the auspices of the Hochsprung Center at Russell Sage College in association with the New York State Council of School Superintendents. The Hochsprung Center was established in memory of Dawn Lafferty Hochsprung, the principal of Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown, Connecticut. Dawn was a member of Albany Cohort 6 and had just completed her first semester in the doctoral program when that tragic day occurred. The mission of the center is to promote mental health and school safety. Our topic this afternoon is supporting new school leaders during these turbulent times. Now let me introduce our panelists and moderator for the program this afternoon. First, Dr. Angelina Maloney, Superintendent of the Brunswick Central School District, more locally known as Brittenkill. Dr. Maloney is a dynamic, hands-on superintendent who epitomizes what a true leader embodies during these turbulent times. In addition to her role as a superintendent, she and her husband serve as EMTs for their local fire department. And she has also recently received her commercial driver's license with an S endorsement to drive school buses. There's a significant shortage of school bus drivers in this region. Prior to becoming superintendent, Dr. Maloney served as principal in the Lansingburg School District and Director of Personnel Development for the Saratoga Springs City School District. Dr. Maloney is a graduate of the doctoral program in educational leadership at Russell Sage College in its initial cohort and serves as an adjunct professor in the program. Our second panelist is Dr. Madeline Taub Chan. Dr. Chan has been an educator with the New York City Department of Education for the past 30 years. She has held the role of teacher, assistant principal, and is currently the community superintendent of District 24 in Queens. Madeline believes that when students are given a voice, they have the power to change systems for the better and create environments where all participants are civically engaged. Madeline is also a graduate and proud member of New York City Cohort 7 of the doctoral program here at Russell Sage. Our final panelist is Dr. Patrick Jean-Pierre, principal of Page Elementary School within the Schenectady City School District. Dr. Jean-Pierre has had an extensive career in education as a teacher, counselor, and leadership development. He has served as the Deputy Assistant Director of Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Albany and the Schenectady City School District. Currently, Dr. Jean-Pierre is the principal of Page in Schenectady, and he received his doctorate in psychology from Rutgers University. He also serves as an adjunct professor at Clark University and Russell Sage College. This is actually his first year as principal. Our moderator this afternoon is Dr. Phyllis Harrington. Prior to becoming a superintendent, Dr. Harrington held the titles of Director of Special Education, Assistant Principal, Elementary Principal, and Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction. She held that role in the Oyster Bay East Norwich School District beginning in 1998 and moved to the superintendency there in 2004. In 2013, she assumed the role of superintendent for the Oceanside School District, where she currently is beginning her 9th year. Her passion for teaching and learning has driven her forward in all the positions she has held. She is most committed to mentoring new administrators. Dr. Harrington has always modeled a strong dedication to professional development and lifelong learning. Phyllis serves as the 2021-2022 NISCUS president and has recently been named to the board of the Leadership for Educational Achievement Foundation, the professional development arm of NISCUS. And now I would like to turn the program over to Dr. Harrington, and Dr. Jean-Pierre may be a few minutes late, but he will join us when he can. Dr.
Thank you.
Harrington.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And let me begin by saying I don't drive school buses. So you got one over on all of us. I'm pretty sure about that. But it really is my pleasure and honor to host this webinar. As Dr. Seal said, I've been the president of the State Council of School Superintendents this year, which has been an interesting challenge for some obvious reasons. I don't think I need to explain that even further. But throughout all of it, I kept saying, my goodness, I'm in my 18th year as a superintendent, and it feels like I'm in day one. I can't imagine what this is like for those new superintendents or new leaders. And I sort of kept that in the forefront of my mind all throughout this year. But when I really took a step back and I thought about the title of this webinar, supporting new school leaders during turbulent times, I really had to say to myself, yeah, this was a unique year. There's no two ways about it. It was a unique couple of years. But the longer I do this work, the more I realize that I don't know that there's ever going to be a time where things are not turbulent, because if it isn't one thing, it's going to be something else. I mean, that really is the life of a school superintendent or the life of a school leader. So, I think as we move forward and we respond to some of these powerful questions, I'd like to think of it in terms of new leaders stepping up into these all important roles, and what can we do and what can we offer to help and support them, and I'll end my opening comments by thanking, the numbers of people that joined this webinar. It's a varied group from what I can tell from all over our diverse state. Which is always an impressive view when you think about our state in that way. But the fact that you took the time, busy time of year, sort of late in the afternoon. For some of us, it's midday. That's also the way it works in the life of a superintendent, but you took this time, and that says something about you and already sets you apart, and clearly has you well on your way to one step further and closer to really living the life of a school superintendent. So with that, and we are shy one panelist, but I'm sure that Dr. Maloney and Dr. Chan will fill in the blanks here. But one of the first really questions that we want to address are having to do with the essential elements. Like, what do you really believe are the essential elements of a mentoring or coaching relationship with a new school leader? And again, as I said, yes, to navigate turbulent times, but can we think of a time when there will not be something that will have to be addressed? So what are those essential elements? And Dr. Maloney, I'm just going to point to you first, since you're in my upper left-hand corner.
So I think, mentorship has been around for quite some time, and it's always been a very important piece to, embedding someone into the new culture and climate of a school district and helping them pave their own pathway. But I think mentorship really had an opportunity to be highlighted during these times because everybody was learning new skills. So for me, I think having a true connection and a meaningful fit is absolutely critical. You can have a formal mentorship on paper, but if the two people or the group of people don't actually connect on a meaningful way, it's not going to be useful. The person's not going to feel safe. They won't reach out when they need it, and they won't feel like they're gaining any value added from that activity. So I think really taking the time to make sure that the relationship is going to be meaningful and that the fit is going to work for all parties involved is critical.
Dr. Chan, would you add to that?
Sure. So I definitely agree with my colleague, Dr. Maloney, and I'd like to add that this meeting is being recorded.
You're still muted, Madeline.
Phyllis, maybe I'll just add
Yeah.
a little bit more while we're working on that. You know, one of the things that I found successful is that you can have more than one mentoring type relationship. There can be that formal technical mentoring relationship where you talk about the work and how to do the work. And then there can be more of an informal or more collegial mentoring relationship where you have someone that you can just bounce ideas off of, maybe even vent. It might be more cathartic. And I think when you have somebody new, or perhaps somebody that's struggling with some new type activities that they have to do in their role, having both things can be absolutely critical. Maybe some people might be intimidated with a mentor that they feel knows so much more than them.
So that leads me to the question, if I was listening to this, and I would say, well, you know, sometimes mentors evolve naturally, and sometimes they're sort of programmed for you. But if you were someone who didn't feel like you really had a mentor or someone you could reach out to, and it wasn't happening naturally, how might you recommend that someone actually seek a mentor or a coach?
I would say, you know, I was thinking back to my own experience, and I'm not even sure I was given a formal mentor. But, you know, someone in a leadership position that I really respected and had a high level of appreciation for just naturally became that fit for me. And I feel really very thankful. And here I am, you know, 15, 20 years later in various leadership roles, and I still reach out to that person. So I think, you know, those can be situational, but they can also be lifelong. And sometimes they'll just reach out to me and just tell me I'm doing a good job. And I find that really very powerful and really very helpful to me, because sometimes you just need a shot in the arm.
I totally agree with that. Patrick, what do you think?
Just in time. I think what you think. Exactly what you just said.
So thank you for joining us. I'm just kind of joking with you. Obviously, I saw you pop up on the screen, and you know what just happened with you is a perfect example of how crazy our lives are in the roles that we have. So it's perfectly acceptable and understandable. But we are talking about mentoring and coaching. So before we move sort of on a little bit, I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of weigh in, and, you know, maybe you have what you would add in terms of, you know, what are some of the essential elements that you think, you know, have to be there for a mentor or a coach of a new leader, regardless of the times at hand?
The essential elements, I would say, it requires, I think, a mentor who can both teach you the day-to-day nuts and bolts of the job, but also a mentor that can really guide you in leading, right? Really guide you in leading an organization that has multiple stakeholders, not only just your employees and teachers. You got to lead the families, you got to lead the students. So a mentor that could really integrate those two. And I think also mentoring on multiple levels. So you can have an individual mentor, like in my district, I have an individual mentor, and then I have a district team that has a model where they mentor and support their building leaders. So I can go to any one of the district leaders for support in a particular area. So the mentoring at multiple levels, I think, is essential. So having your own individual mentor, but having a district team that understands how mentoring should be implemented and they approach their work in that way has been very helpful to me.
And having that individual mentor is fascinating. Did you seek that person on your own, or was that person appointed to you?
So actually, we had a process in our district where you shared what type of mentor you were looking for, and then they assigned one of the more senior mentors, more senior building principals to support you.
That's a great concept. Madeline, welcome back, Dr. Chan. Glad to have you back.
I apologize for the technical difficulties. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes,
I'm
we can.
almost afraid to start speaking.
No,
That
all
never
good.
happened before.
And you were in the middle of some wonderful words. Would you like to sort of kind of bring that back a little bit?
Sure. So as superintendent of a very large district, I also consider myself to be a mentor of my principals. And I try to build capacity every day by explaining to them that you're not going to be in this seat forever. And as the mentor, I try to convey the following message. So what type of leader do you want to be? What will be your non-negotiables? What are your goals towards this development? And how will you know if you're being successful? And my accountability as a mentor to them, as Dr. Maloney put it so eloquently, you have to cultivate those connections, and you have to make sure that you're really honoring the feelings of each and every one of them about work, and to some extent about their personal life. If the pandemic taught me anything, it's that we have to understand what goes on beyond the scenes and beyond the walls of the school to fully have a relationship with our leaders, especially our new ones, so that we can support them, not only within the school building, but also beyond.
Thank you for sharing all of that about mentoring and coaching. It is so vital. You know, but we, as I mentioned earlier, we have a pretty large group of people who really have a varying degree of positions currently, from assistant principals to people who are themselves superintendents. You know, but one of the things I think we share, you know, as a common objective and goal is to continue to inspire not just those looking for further advancement and further positions, but those even entering the field of educational leadership, that this is the best job in the world, right? It is a fulfilling career path, despite the turbulence, despite all of the chaos that sometimes we feel on a day-to-day basis. So how do we build a talent pool? How do we communicate to those that this is the best job around, no matter what? What would you say to that? Patrick, would you mind starting us off on that?
Yes, absolutely. What I would say is we need to highlight more of the transformational pieces as opposed to the transactional pieces. Because I think in this job, there's no, being a principal, what I find is that you can make a difference in the lives of many. So I think highlighting the piece of the transformational pieces, working with different stakeholders, the opportunity to be innovative and create changes and bring new experiences to the lives of many. I think those are the things we need to highlight. Yes, we do curriculum. Yes, we do instruction. Yes, we do assessments. But I think 90% of the job, you know, is making sure, you know, my teachers can do the work that they do and ensure that we have a culture and climate that supports them to do that. Making sure students feel like they belong and they can find their gift within the instructional process that we provide for them, and building a community where families and the community itself feel like they're part of the school. So I think selling the position in that way, I think most people would say, that's what I want to do. So I would say highlighting the transformational pieces and the wonderful things we do on a day-to-day basis would be very much what would build the talent pool and get a lot more people interested in leading a school building.
I couldn't agree more. And I loved the way you said that, highlight the transformational pieces. I wrote that down because I want to remember those words. It's really, really, I think, very powerful. Dr. Chan, would you like to weigh in on this one?
Thank you. So in finding a talent pool, and it came about just this year when there were some individuals who I felt would be excellent principals, and they kind of said, no, thank you. And in all of my years of being a superintendent, I've never really had anyone say to me, I think I'm just going to continue with the path that I'm doing now. I'm not really looking to excel. And it had to do with the turbulent times. I am sure of it. So I think it's really important to continue to remind people why they chose this profession, which is actually a calling and not just a profession. And then to consistently highlight and celebrate how they're making differences every day. Because I believe if people are not only happy with the work that they're doing, but also if they feel fulfilled, then it will continue to flourish throughout their career. And then they will want to move ahead. Other pieces that go with building a talent pool have to do with really looking for the creativity in people and encouraging that as well as their flexibility. And then lastly, I think the supports are essential. So if people know that you are going to be in front, behind, and beside them, and that they will always have the support they need to move forward in the worst of times, because there's always people around in the best of times.
That's a
It's
great
in the
point.
worst of times when you need to know that someone's going to stand by you and make sure that your vulnerability turns into a strength and it's okay to make mistakes. I think that that reputation will always build the talent pool.
That's making so many different things of what you said make so much sense. But, you know, I love the idea again, that it is a calling. It's not a job. It's not even a profession. It is a calling. So, you know, very, very well said. And Dr. Maloney, I'll give you the final word on that, and then I'll come back to you, Patrick.
I'm not sure I have anything as profound as my two colleagues here, but I do think in thinking about the answer to this question, all I could think of was helpers and being that helper. And most of the leaders that I know, especially the really, really good ones, have this innate desire to do better and to support others. So despite the maybe skills of being a great orator or, you know, an outstanding curriculum person, deep down, they stepped into the position so that they could help kids, colleagues, teachers, paraprofessionals, whatever. And I think somehow connecting to someone to tell them that despite all the tasks, you really do get to help others, because we're in a people business and we get to support people. And I think that's what stands out to me most. And on a personal note, that's where I feel best. I might write a really good entry plan. I might write a really good 5-year forecast for our budget. But when I help someone or help our district in some way, that's where I feel like my innermost motivation is satiated, and it drives me to do more and to do better.
That's great, Angie. Thank you. Patrick, you wanted to add something to that.
Yes, I love what my colleagues shared about it. It is a calling. It definitely, you know, you got to be a helper. You know, you got to be a servant leader. And I want to, in terms of the talent pool, one thing I want to add is that I think if we want to increase the talent pool, right, we could definitely, this is an exciting job, but I think focusing a little bit more on diversity and equity, I think that will definitely help increase our talent pool in all our roles, you know, equity around race, ethnicity, you know, gender, I think will definitely help us to increase the pool, right? If there's an intentional focus, you know, actually letting other diverse groups know that we need you in order to do this work, will definitely also increase the talent pool.
I don't disagree, and hold on to that thought, because that might play a part on our next question. But I just wanted to sort of end with, you know, I had to pick a theme as the president of the New York State Council of School Superintendents for the year, and I decided to pick the theme, The Ride of a Lifetime, which actually came from a book from Bob Iger, who was CEO of Disney for so many years. He was actually a graduate of the school district that I'm the superintendent right now, and he wrote a book, The Ride of a Lifetime. And I kind of joke with my colleagues. I did this in September, and then we had a conference in March, and I said, I know I talked about the ride of a lifetime, and clearly that's what the superintendency is like. I never ever thought that this year we'd be on the cyclone and weren't going to be able to get off. But the truth is, that's what it is. So it is the ride of a lifetime. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, but you have to find the joy. You have to. And I think each one of you said it one way or the other. At the end of the day, it comes back to the kids. And I don't know what you guys experience, but I know for me, even last year when we had half our kids in and half out, and it just was crazy. And then this year, at the end of the day, when you walked in the buildings and you walked into the classrooms, the kids were really okay. And they were doing really great things with their teachers, despite the obstacles that were faced in front of them. And now we are feeling like it's a new beginning, right? It's almost April, but it feels like the beginning of the school year again. And just walking those buildings. And I know that there were times throughout the year that I had to really pull my central office staff, who was so bogged down into managing COVID, for lack of a better way to say it. And I really had to say to them, no, come, let's go to this school, let's go to that school. And it doesn't take long, but all you need is a half hour walking in and out of classrooms, or just seeing kids in the hall, or just seeing kids in the gym, to realize and be reminded why you do what you do. And that's really what it comes down to. It comes down to the kids. I think, Dr. Maloney, you said we are a people business. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's why these last couple of years have been so difficult for those of us who are so people oriented, but we got into this business because it's a business. It's a people business. And, that's why the connection, and that's why even what we're doing now, I mean, for this type of a situation, it's a perfect way to have a webinar and do some PD, right? But at the end of the day, if it's the only way, it doesn't work for me. And I don't know about others, but it doesn't work for me. So with that being said, let me move on to the next question, because this webinar is sponsored by an incredibly reputable institute of higher education. There are a number that we're all so familiar with. But what partnerships in particular might you think we could engage in with higher ed institutions that can build those relationships for both, honestly, pre-service leaders, as well as professional development moving forward for those in the trenches, if you will? What thoughts would you share with that? Dr. Chan, if you don't mind, I will start with you.
Sure. My district has had wonderful results partnering with Queens College as well as St. John's University. These academic institutions are perfect partners for schools. We've gotten a lot of student teachers who then become teachers and become assistant principals. So that's been a great thread. The reason that these partnerships have been so successful is because they model a lot of the similar goals of the district, like self-awareness. There's a lot of reflective practices. There's transparency, and most importantly, there's ethical behavior. But I will say that we have also had a lot of good fortune partnering with neighborhood establishments, because when we want to highlight diversity, what better way than to go out in the community and really tap the resources of like the local precincts and the fire stations, the museums. I'm fortunate enough to have the Hall of Science in my backyard. So these services, as well as some other entrepreneurial services, have really done tremendous work for the schools, and we've gotten so many resources out of them, especially during the pandemic. I really have to celebrate their efforts.
Fabulous, fabulous. Dr. Maloney, I know you live in a different world than Dr. Chan, so what would you say?
My first thought in thinking about this question is it's a great synergistic relationship between the pure and applied. And, the theory of, at the university and talking about these situations and how to do the job, and then the boots on the ground doing the job. And I think it's a great synergistic relationship to remind the practitioners at the higher level what's going on in the schools, but vice versa. It's a reminder, to not get too deep into the trenches here at the school and look at best practices and the latest engaging research. And I think it's just a great reminder to not go too far down those pathways although my backyard is different, we have, you know, several universities and colleges nearby. And similar to my colleagues, you know, they provide a great wealth of information. And I find that if we just ask, they will give. And sometimes if you don't know what to ask for, you just tell them that you'd like to partner. And then that really healthy dialogue comes forth. And, you know, I've had some great fortune over the years to have students come in and just do wonderful things for our kids. I've had professional development come in from the practitioners. It's just been really synergistic, but in my mind, it was pure and applied, and it's a healthy dynamic.
Thank you. Dr. Jean-Pierre?
Yes, I agree with my colleagues. It's a relationship that works really well. You have the researchers and then you have the practitioners. And in my district, what's been done well in terms of those collaborations is that we've developed a lot of grow your own programs. And within those grow your own programs, we have opportunities where our teachers and principals can teach at the colleges. We've had opportunities where the folks in higher ed come into our district and they teach intro to education, right? They begin to expose our students to education. And recently our superintendent has launched a grow your own program where we're beginning to work with not only teachers and the typical people, but we're also looking at the folks on the vocational side. So you know, because people who want to be custodians, people who want to be cleaners, other positions as well. So it's really a very comprehensive grow your own program. So it's not just looking at the academic piece of it, but it's also looking at all of those other type of roles and positions that schools have, right? Custodians, cleaners, and security officers. So it's really comprehensive in that way, and we're helping people to get further in their education while they still begin to promote themselves within the organization as well.
That sounds incredibly fascinating, and it really speaks to that whole concept of it takes a village. I'm going to throw a question at the three of you, and I hope you don't mind. Forgive me in advance because it's not one of the predetermined questions. But as I'm looking at the three of you, and I guess I'll add myself to this. You know, we are four very different school leaders who come from very different backgrounds, yet we've all managed throughout our tenure to date to achieve what I consider to be the highest pinnacle of our profession, which is achieving the doctorate or the PhD or the EDD, whatever. You know, so I'm wondering, especially because we have so many people really across the board who are participating in this webinar, what advice might you give them? Because I've been pretty specific with my colleagues who I have encouraged, you know, to take that leap and to go forward. But I'd be very interested in knowing you know, your take on it as we're looking at new leaders who may in fact first be starting new positions. Some are already in them, but you know, maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And of course, you know, as I said earlier, there are a number of higher ed institutions that support that type of work, and Russell Sage certainly being one of them. Dr. Maloney, maybe you can begin with that one.
I think, you know, this is going to sound kind of corny, but I think know your why. For me, it was a personal life goal. It had nothing to do with professional aspirations. So for me, it didn't matter what job I was doing or how I was doing it, or if I was going to be scooping ice cream. It was a personal goal. So that was really important because my desire to do that was somewhere deep inside, and it had always been a really long standing goal. With regards to where, it had to be a really good fit. I personally believed in the cohort model. That was incredibly important to me. So that made a big difference in my decision. And I wanted a program that was going to help me get through despite what life may have thrown my way. I was a high school principal at the time, very, very busy with young children. And I wanted to know that my program was going to have my back and wasn't trying to weed me out, rather trying to help me succeed. And that was really very important to me. I think sometimes people do it and they might not know why they do it. And I think the urgency to get across the line isn't there for them. So it becomes a lot easier to fall off track.
I think that's a really, really great point. Patrick, would you like to add to that?
I'm coming. That took me a little while. How you doing? So I would say I agree with my colleague. It truly has to be a good fit, and I believe don't do the doctorate because you just want the credentials, but do the doctorate because you know how it's going to begin to help you to do your work better. And I went to do my doctorate after I was teaching in Brooklyn, New York, and I began to see that I was in the system and I needed to think differently about working with the system. So I went and did my doctorate, and that helped to change the way I think, right? I started to think more like a researcher, how to solve problems, looking at data. So I think you really got to think about your why. I agree, because that's really going to help you to find the program that actually works for you, but do it because you see how it's going to take you to the next step and how it's going to help you to do your job more effectively, more efficiently, and make a difference. Because I really feel like getting your doctorate, it does help you to think differently about your work. You know, you begin to think about multiple ways of analyzing things, right? So I think it's beneficial for whoever has the capacity to do it. I think it's a great opportunity.
Thank you for that. Dr. Chan, I saw you agreeing with what Patrick was saying, but what would you like to add to that?
Thank you. I agree with both of my colleagues. So this, I say it, you know, with no embarrassment that the doctorate program that I took at Sage Colleges was my third try at a doctorate. And what Dr. Maloney said, it really depends upon if you match the program. And the cohort model was a great match for me. The whole program became like a lifeline for me because it was majority of the time was during the pandemic. And it was a very difficult time in my district. We were the epicenter of the pandemic. I'm located in Corona. That's where the district office is. And just the amount of loss and devastation was incredible. And I was able to anchor myself in the work. And I think it really was like a savior for me mentally. It didn't only make me a better educator, it also made me a better person because it taught me how to be more reflective and to celebrate the things that I did right and to figure out the things that I wasn't doing right. I would say that the one most important thing that I got out of the doctorate that I now use every day as a superintendent is that when people call me and they are upset about something and they're working from a point of feelings, I say to them, you need to breathe. I hear what you're saying, but let's talk about the facts. Let's look at the data. Let's look at what is around this topic that can help you get out of the place that you're in and find resolve. And if it wasn't for the doctorate program, I would not be thinking that way. It changed my thought process. And for that, I will be forever grateful.
So full disclosure, this wasn't an advertisement for anything or any place, but thank you for sharing that. I think what you all said was really so very, very profound. And, you know, I know for what I'm so old, I got my doctorate such a long time ago that it was before they had things like cohorts, but quite honestly, we formed our informal cohort. It happened. We didn't need someone to tell us you're a cohort. We just became that. And I have to say to this day, some of the strongest professional personal relationships I built that I still have, and it's 30 years later, to be honest. I still have those relationships. And boy, when you think about, you know, the go-to person or the go-to people during turbulent times, it comes back to who can you pick the phone up and who can you call, who can you cry to, who can you admit what you just absolutely just, you know, mess up. And you get those different mentors, if you will, or friends or professional colleague friends from a variety of sources, but a good number of them have come at least for me, and it sounds like from you as well, from the people that were side by side during a difficult time, working through a doctorate. It's not easy. As I say to so many people, if it was easy, everybody would do it, right? And that's not the case. That being said, it's also very, very doable, especially if you know your why. And Dr. Maloney, thank you for that, because that's absolutely key. Okay, back to some of the questions we had in advance. If you could talk about some policies and supports that you think are needed, to help build capacity in educational leadership. What would you say to that? Dr. Chan, maybe you can start with that. Policies and supports needed to build capacity.
Sure. So I'll start with supports. I think it's really important to just keep your eye on the prize. And one of the biggest prizes is culture of a school. So as an educational leader, you want to make sure that you have a clear picture of the current culture of the school. If you're a new principal, that's something that you have to connect with. And then determine, as a leader, what can you bring to the equation to actually strengthen that existing culture? And also what can be done to change or reshape the culture for the better as needed. Moving forward with supports for new leaders, you want to make sure that they have really strong systems for collaboration and trust and learning and high expectations. And you also want to make sure they have the ability to intentionally design their own vision and mission, because what are they going to bring to this existing culture where there's possibly has been a leader who's been there for 20 years. And now you as a new leader, I'm sorry, my lights just went out. I'm not having a good time with technology, but I'm gonna keep talking though.
I think that's their way of telling you should go home.
I'm gonna keep talking. The ability to intentionally design a vision and a mission, I think is so important. And then in terms of policy, so I know that clear information for new leaders is really essential. And you always want to develop a strong managerial and operational structure. But I have leaders who say to me, I didn't go to law school. I don't understand these regulations. So I'm wondering about future policies and how they could be more explicit and succinct for new leaders so that they make sense and they're purposeful and they can be applied in the right manner. And now I'm going to go turn on the lights.
Dr. Maloney,
right back.
Take your time. Don't trip in the dark.
I think I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to respond to the question. My first thought went to internships and how we really need to, from a policy or more of a macro level, look at the quality of the internships. I think in some cases, if a leader doesn't have an authentic, really comprehensive, all-inclusive internship, we're really not setting them up for the greatest success that they could have, because they could have a major skill deficit or a major experience that they haven't learned from that might set them up to make some bad choices. So if I had the ability to influence policy, I would say we should take more of a medical approach, very similar to rounds or residency, where it's a little bit longer, it's a little more comprehensive, and maybe we put some money towards it. It shouldn't be an afterthought and just a collection of hours. It should be really authentic and grown throughout the process, so that when you put somebody in a position to be so responsible for so many things, they've got all the dispositions and experiences so that they can call from to tackle really difficult situations that we're having now. In my opinion, the job has really changed as society has changed, and you want to make sure that someone is equipped to be able to handle that, so that they keep their students and staff safe, but they can also do the best to move their district forward.
So Angie, it's so interesting that you should say that, because I couldn't agree more. And I don't know if you realize that New Jersey actually has I think, a model that makes so much sense. It's pretty much exactly what you're talking about. In particular, the one I'm familiar with, only because a colleague of mine had actually taught in it. It was for school principals. So you get your certification, if you will, but you don't get that final permanent status until you do a full year's internship with a mentor, if you will, and that you have to pay for it, if you and many districts do that. They hire the principal, it becomes part of the way they do it. It's not really expensive, but it's the concept that you will be supported through a full internship year before you are deemed qualified to be a sitting principal, even though you're doing the job. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about how much sense that makes. So, for example, in New York State, I think they still have to take these exams in order to be certified, and how crazy that is, because it's meaningless compared to authentic experiences. So I've actually toyed with thinking about putting a proposal together for SED, New York State SED, because that really is, it is policy. So I could not agree with you more on that. And I'll just add one other quick thing. When I started in the district I'm in now, my very first administrative job many years ago, they had a system in place here. It wasn't policy, it wasn't SED regulated, but they hired full-time administrative interns. You had to have your certification. You came on board. They committed to you for 2 school years, no more than that, but with an idea and an eye towards a potential retirement and a direction you likely would go to. The beauty in that is you got to experience what the real world was like as an administrator. They got really good work from paying someone a teacher salary, because that's basically what they did. And at the end of the day, it was like a 2-year interview. So, for example, in my situation, at the end of the 2 years, they moved me into as director of special ed, because they really needed that help. Again, this was a long, long time ago. Things were very different than they are now. It was a beautiful model. The thought of doing something like that in today's world, as brilliant a model as it is, it has a cost attached to it, and it becomes very hard to defend that publicly when you're trying to, put together budgets and everything under the tax cap and all, everything that goes into that. But the concept of an internship, going back to that word, I just think is absolutely a key. And there's a number of ways you can do it. But I think if SED regulated it through policy, like you said, Dr. Maloney, I think that's the way to go. So we may have to work on that. Patrick, you have the last word on this one.
So the way I thought about this in terms of a policy, I was thinking of an experience that I had in my district where we worked on building a particular policy, and this was an equity policy. And I found that as going through that process and learning about equity, even at a deeper level, it really provided some practical ways to really continue to build your capacity for a very long time to come. When you think about it, we talked about curriculum, right? How do you always get everyone to see themselves in the learning, right? That will never change, right? Even if you have demographic shifts, it will shift, and that policy will still be relevant, right? We looked at culture and climate. When we think about DEI, it's really culture and climate, right? No matter how your people change, who they are, places they come from, you're always going to need to focus on that. So I really, and the high expectations, what I loved about it is that when we started to create that equity policy, it talked about not having a deficit perspective, right? And it's almost a policy that reminds you, right, every year, right, to look at the people you're teaching, the people that you're trying to build their capacity up. It really tells you that you got to stay very intentional in what you do as a leader. So I felt like that policy was a good way to really not only build capacity in the moment, but to ensure that you're going to build capacity for years to come, because it's always relevant based on the context, time, and period.
What I love is that the three of you took this in a slightly different direction, but each point was so meaningful and powerful. So So thank you for that. Would in the same way of building capacity, is there anything in particular in regards to any specific professional development or even resources that you think are absolutely necessary to build capacity in leaders? Dr. Maloney, maybe you'd like to begin that one?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think, being on the cutting edge of research is absolutely critical. That's what, all the other professional jobs are very much known for. Instead of a professional development that you're thinking about something else and maybe you're not really engaged. But my other thought would be, to have opportunities to go to other schools and learn from other organizations. I think sometimes you could get mired down in your own system and not see the forest between the trees. And I think anytime I work with other people or hear, a case study of something that went well or didn't go well, I learn a little bit more. So I think that's a really powerful opportunity to learn from people, because maybe it's not an issue in your system now, but it might be. So to be thinking and learning from those things, I find it to be really helpful. So having that network of people that talk together and learn together, I think is absolutely critical.
Okay, Dr. Jean-Pierre, would you like to add to that?
Yes, just that last piece you said was
Yeah.
excellent because our district just created what we're calling the Patriot Leadership Academy, where they're developing leaders within, but every month we come together and there's presentations on systems, there's presentations on trauma, there's all sorts of presentations from the expertise that our various leaders within the district bring. So that has really helped to develop everyone's capacity because oftentimes we all know a lot of the work, but there's never that opportunity to come together and build. So they've created this academy. So we don't only have principals there's teachers, there's paraprofessionals. If you're interested in becoming a leader, here's the pathway, and we're building your capacity to be able to do that. So that has been a great experience, and everyone brings something very different to the table depending on your role.
Love that. That sounds like a really great model that others could duplicate relatively easily, I think. So thank you for sharing that. Dr. Chan, what would you add to that?
So I love what my colleagues said. I mean, they're so spot on. When I think about ongoing professional development to build capacity in leaders, I think specifically about relatability and what does that look like for the information that we're conveying to new leaders. Is it individualized? Is it prescriptive? Is it diagnostic? I think all of those characteristics are really needed so that we're not just presenting generic information that may or may not be able to be used. I think that leaders need professional development on empowering parents. That is probably the most essential component now for all new leaders, to make sure that parents are engaged and empowered. And I also think that new leaders need professional development around the ability to look at data, to triangulate results, even participate like in multiple cycles of field testing, be able to revise instructional programs, and ultimately monitor and evaluate for impact. And there should also be PD around how are we involving students in activities? Are they clearly connected to their experiences and cultures and futures? And are we giving students voice, choice, and decision-making power? And it's easy to say to do that, but there needs to be a lot of training around it. It's a sensitive topic. So ultimately we want PD for new leaders to enhance like a deeply value-focused picture of the future for their school, and one where their vision can be solid, but also evolving.
Again, all three of you said, really spot on kinds of things. The question that just actually comes to my mind as you were speaking, and I also use this as an opportunity to let the participants know to feel free to put into the chat any specific question they may have. But what came to mind as you were speaking actually sort of brings me back to one of the very first questions we addressed regarding mentoring. How do we get past with new leaders, them not feeling that if they ask questions or if they feel the need for this ongoing PD, that someone, whoever that someone is going to think that, they're not ready for the job, or they're not up to the job, or that it's a sign of weakness? How would you address that? Dr. Chan, when you want to start, we'll go backwards.
Sure. I mean, I hold myself accountable as the superintendent to making sure that people trust me. So if I have not developed that trust with new leaders, sure, they are going to ask those questions in hesitation. But I explain to new and old leaders, new and veteran leaders, you need to tell me what's going on. You need to loop me in. You have to be honest with me and transparent and authentic. And I'm here to help you. And if you don't establish that connection at the beginning of the relationship, then they're not going to be able to be honest and ask for help. But a new leader definitely needs a support where they can not worry about picking up the phone, even if it's 20 times a day. And that's really been my mantra.
You used a great word, and I don't know if we've heard it yet up to this point, of the word trust, how absolutely invaluable and necessary it is to do any of the things we've been talking about up to this point. So thank you for reminding us of the importance of that word. Dr. Jean-Pierre, what would you add?
I agree with the trust piece, and being very intentional that as the superintendent, that you want for me, principals to be successful. Because what I can remember on the first day our new superintendent told us was that I'm here for you, and I'm here to serve you, and my cabinet and my district team is going to serve you, and we want all of you to be successful. And he told us, he said, the question I always want you to remember is whether your school is better because you're the leader. And he said, I'm going to ask myself every day whether our district is better because I'm the superintendent, right? So at that point, he allowed us to sort of say, okay, this is a real different dynamic here, right? We're all here to grow. We're all here to grow together, and we're all here to support each other's growth. So I felt just in making that intentional statement and being very clear about it and making it part of the vision. So now we all do that, right? And I say the same thing to my teachers and my team. I said, is the school better because you work here?
I love that. Absolutely love that. A very simple question, but what powerful messages it sends. So thank you for sharing that, really. Dr. Maloney, anything you'd add?
Sure. Patrick, you used the word intentional. I was thinking explicit. And what I mean by that is be really explicit about the boundaries under your relationship and what you would expect for them and what's okay. And telling them and giving them really explicit permission to make a mistake, to ask for help, to tell me if you did something wrong, or whatever the myriad of things, whatever that dynamic is for you, but opening that door. And unless I don't think you can assume that people know naturally to do that. And unless you give them very explicit permission to do it, they might not think that that's acceptable. So if I've learned anything, it's that. But again, that's got to be backed up by trust, because you can't just say the words and then not be able to back it up by having their back. And I think that comes with time, but really being clear, if this happens, I want you to do this. That's my expectation. And then that becomes just part of your dynamic, your relationship.
Dr. Harrington, can I add one more thing?
Please.
So I consider being the hiring officer for principals one of my most important positions, because that's my legacy. And I will tell new leaders before they're hired, once you go into this position, you are now a reflection of me because you are my choice. So we're either going to succeed together or we won't. But whatever it is, it's going to be together. So at no point do they feel they are working in a silo. So I had mentioned the trust. I just wanted to talk a little bit about how I develop it. And that's really the essence of it.
I think that's smart in so many ways because it also sends the message, I'm going to have you back because your back is my back. So, that's really what you're saying to them, which I think is an incredibly powerful message. Go ahead, Doctor.
I just wanted to add to that again, these two folks are just really, they're brilliant. And my experience, being at the principal first year, hey,
God bless.
I will say I haven't gotten everything just right. And actually that I've made some errors for sure that I can admit. But the way from all levels, the way my superintendent treated me, the way the deputy super treated me, the way the executive director for elementary principals treated me, it wasn't with shame, They didn't treat me with shame. That was the trust, They didn't treat me with shame, but said, look, how can we make this a learning moment, So I was able not to, check out and withdraw from my role, but gain my role back because it was a different question. How can we learn from this moment and how can we do it better the next time? And then I believe you can do it the next time, I believe you can do it the next time. So I think those moments, like you said, is not just the words, but how you show that you have their back and how you show that back action is very important. So I just wanted to share that because that was very helpful for me to say, oh, all right, I can continue. I can do this work.
And I really thank you for sharing that, but don't shortchange yourself either, because obviously they do believe in you, and they do, and I'm sure that's because they have good reason to. So please keep that in mind. Don't sell yourself too short. Let me ask this question about social network theory. How do you think social network theory, however you define that, not exactly sure, to be brutally honest, but I'll leave it up to you guys. How does social network theory apply in terms of building a supportive culture for leaders? What would you say to that? And I think, Dr. Maloney, I'm going to come to you first. I know, I'm sorry.
I was hoping I wouldn't be first. To me, it's knowing your organization, not assuming, taking the time to get to know the organization and know the players and know the systems of communication. And one mistake that people make is to come in with their program and their style, but rather if you're a true leader, you assimilate to what's there and you bring it to the next level. And if you don't take that time to really get to know those networks and who the formal and informal players are in the network, you could find yourself in a bit of trouble. So to me, that's what it means. People often have an entrance plan and that kind of thing, but as great as that is, sometimes you just got to stop and listen. And it's easier, in my mind, it's more important to have small victories than big losses by just taking some things for granted or making some serious assumptions about some of the social networks. The reality is, in our systems, the people have been there before us, and many of them might be there after us. And they assume that we're just kind of passing through. So you really need to take time and to become a part of their world instead of making it your world.
Very well said. Very well said. Patrick, I'm coming to you next.
I think it's essentially important, those social networks. Not only the social network within the district community, I have people I've graduated from my program with that I'm still in touch with and having conversations with. I have one principal that I've worked with, we call each other every morning and connect, but he's not in my district. So I feel those social networks really help you to be able to do your job more effectively. That's what I'll say. So I think it's essentially important to be able to build them and for every leader to have them.
Okay, Dr. Chan?
So I'm going to err on the side of Alan Daly, who wrote a book, Social Network Theory. And Dr. Daly said, understanding the conditions and processes that propel or inhibit change is essential for an effective leader. And it makes me think about social relationships and how important that is. And without it, you don't really have strong ties to do the work that you need to do as a leader. Social networking during the pandemic made me think about how has my why changed as a leader? What does it really entail now? And who will be affected by what I knew and what I currently know?
Again, just a wonderful way to sort of capture the essence of a big part of what we're really dealing with. I'm going to get to a final question. I'm going to pose it in a slightly different way, and you can take it wherever you want and give your final words with that. So one of the challenges that I've been faced with new leaders is trying to help them understand that this job shouldn't be and can't be 24/7. That at a 24/7 rate, new leaders, old leaders, whatever it will burn out. We cannot continue to function at that rate. Yet social networking, social media has really escalated the communication cycle and the things that are obvious. I don't need to go through them all, but I do think, and maybe it's just me, and please, if you feel differently, push back, and of course I'm not minimizing, emergencies that need to be taken care of or things getting done and not leaving things undone. But at the end of the day, I worry about this trend towards this 24/7, 7 days a week, and it got weekends, vacations, and it goes on and on. How do we, so take everything we talked about, and especially about how we want to encourage these new leaders to be the educational leaders we need, but at the same time make them understand it doesn't have to be 24/7 in order to be effective. Is that fair, what I'm trying to get at? Dr. Chan, maybe you can start and we'll just go around.
Yeah, I mean, as you're asking the question, I'm saying I have a good answer, but I'm not a good model for this. But I have yet to do a better job of balancing life and work, especially with the pandemic. Work really became 24/7 and it was essential. But I hold my new and veteran leaders accountable to talking to me about how they are balancing and exactly what they're doing and what they need from me to help them. So if it's an afternoon where they're going to watch their son at a soccer game, or they're going to take off an hour or two in the morning and go for a jog, that's something that I highly, highly encourage. But it's a delicate dance. Yeah. Because as a building leader, if everyone is there at 7:30 and you're out at the gym, that's a difficult optic. Yeah. So you have to try to, do what's smart, think about your school, but also think about yourself. And we have something in this district called Digital Detox. Ooh. Where on the weekends, I say to principals, unless it's an emergency, I don't want you on your phone, BlackBerry, or computer. And if I have to send you an email because it's something that I need you to know, I will always put in the email, do not read this until Monday morning.
Well, so, I think there's probably a whole lot of people on this webinar who want to come and work for you. But that's wonderful. That really is. And I love the term digital detox. I'm going to steal it from you if that's okay. Love it. Love it. Dr. Jean-Pierre, what would you add?
I think she really hit it on the nail, right? I want to be a good model, but I'm not. It's a first year building leader. You think about it all the time, but it's so important for, to have that balance, I believe. And, I try to do that with the folks who are in my building and say, family comes first, right? And then your job. So I try to send that message as much as I can and try my best to follow it as well, because I find that the better you are in your personal life, the better you are at work, because you can't really separate the two.
So that's interesting. You should say that. I heard a very smart female superintendent do a presentation at one of our women's initiatives, and she said, actually, there's no such thing as work home balance, because it's impossible to balance. Start to think about it as integration. And how are you going to make that integration work? And the more I thought about that, the more I realized that really does make sense, because it really is not possible to actually have an equal balance. It just doesn't work that way. And ever since I've been thinking of it more in terms of integration, it's actually helped me a lot. So thank you. Dr. Maloney, final word.
Yeah, I would say, I'm going to use my term again, explicit. I think, being really direct with your leadership team and your teachers, and actually everybody for that matter, about what you want from them. I don't think that we can assume that they know what's in your mind and what your belief system is unless you say that. And I too use the term family first, because if things aren't well at home, you're not going to be 100% to do your jobs, and our kids deserve that. I think you have to really respect time. One of the things I'm trying to get better at is not send an email when it comes to my mind to schedule the send, so that it doesn't pop in somebody's email box. Certainly if it's an emergency, I know how to get a hold of them. But I'll think of something at a wacky time, but just because I'm thinking of it doesn't mean that it has to go to their mailbox. And also just what to hold loose and tight. I think, realizing that some things, the grant may be able to wait until tomorrow, but student safety can't. And once you can figure out that, what you can hold loose and tight, you can make some decisions about those boundaries. Some days you might just have to put it off to the next day where you can be 100%. Not the things that are critically important, safety and all those kind of things, but some other things really aren't as urgent necessarily. Maybe you have to call state ed and say, hey, can I have to the end of the week? And almost every time I've ever had to reach out for anything like that, they've been super cooperative, because something must have been more important. And I wanted to give my best at what it was. And I found that out a lot during COVID. It was hard to be everything to everyone at that time. And sometimes I just had to prioritize and decide what to keep loose and tight.
Yeah, great points. I lied. I said last question. There's one question in the chat about mindfulness. Would anyone with any experience with that want to add to how mindfulness could possibly be embedded into our work and in just improving mental health for everyone?
Sure, I'm happy to talk to that. So, especially with the pandemic on everyone's plate, mindfulness has played a big role in many of my schools, where there will be a mindfulness room set up for staff as well as students. And there'll be some calming techniques in there. There'll be different lighting. There'll be different types of furniture. I want to say probably 50% of my school now have yoga for staff and students. And we do have some data that shows results that has helped with discipline as well as absences, which I think is tremendous. So it's definitely something that we are aware of, and along with social emotional learning, trying to get better at every day.
Awesome. Anybody else? Angela, Patrick, anybody?
Every morning during my announcements, I do a mindfulness activity
Great.
that everyone participates. It takes no more than a minute. So every week we have a new one.
I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I would say, just like any change to a culture and climate, it just takes time and planning. So I think if anybody's really interested in going into it and it's not well received at first, just recalibrate and try again. It's going to take some time for it to be embedded as part of the fabric of your culture.
Okay. So I can't thank all three of you enough. You've been an amazing panel. My honor to moderate. I thank you on behalf of the New York State Council of School Superintendents. And I see Dr. Steele, you've come back up on the screen. Would you like to say some parting closing words?
Absolutely, Dr. Harrington. Thank you. First of all, thank you to our panelists, Dr. Maloney, Dr. Jean-Pierre, and Dr. Taub Chan. Amazing, engaging, very thoughtful conversation that I've listened to for more than an hour. I appreciate your comments. I'm really sure that the people who were listening this afternoon have multiple takeaways from this conversation, and I'm sure people were taking notes. I know Phyllis, you're going to steal some of those ideas, no question about it. But that's the reason why we try to offer these webinars, to bring people from across the state together and share. This is in essence a social network that we're creating, and through New York State. So I want to thank all of you for being here, for giving of your time and sharing your expertise this afternoon. NISCUS will be sending out a survey as a follow-up to this conference. And I'll just mention that at the end of April, on April 26th, we will have our next webinar in this series. And I think it's something, again, we talk about turbulent times, but the topic for April is civility and engaging our school communities. So I don't know if that's a hot topic, but I think it is. And, I think we need to be prepared as educational leaders to deal with civility, and try to hopefully reinstate that whole concept in our discourse. So with that being said, I want to thank NISCUS for helping our department and the Hawk Springs Center at Russell Sage College for sponsoring the webinar. And again, I want to thank Dr. Harrington, Dr. Maloney, Dr. Jean-Pierre, and Dr. Madeline Taub. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
You're more than welcome.
And enjoy
Thanks,
your
everyone.
evening. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.